Well, welcome everyone to today's webinar on compensation strategies for Section 4960. Thank you all so much for joining us. Before we begin, I wanted to take a moment to let you know that we are recording this session, and both the recording and slide deck will be distributed to attendees via email, as well as available through our normal communication channels. As you have questions, you may post them in the Zoom Q&A, and we will answer questions towards the end of the call. We will try our best to answer all of your questions at the end of today's meeting, but if for whatever reason we are unable to get to your question today, please feel free to email Michael Stagnita at NFP. Our moderator scheduled for today, Ken Feinberg, had a family issue pop up last minute, but he will be joining us towards the end of the presentation. In his place, Alan Meltzer will lead our discussion. Alan has worked in the life insurance and estate planning fields for over 40 years, earning MassMutual's highest honor, Agent of the Year, an unprecedented 18 times during his career. Alan founded the Meltzer Group in 1982 as a single insurance agent and grew the firm to one with more than 300 dedicated team members across 5 lines of business, and to a point where it was consistently recognized as the largest insurance consultant in the greater Washington, D.C. area. Alan, I'll now turn it over to you so you can introduce our panelists.
Thanks so much. First, I'd like to introduce Kristen Boulat for NFP. Throughout her career, Kristen has been responsible for implementing complicated tax plans for individuals while simultaneously guiding business development. A tax attorney with a JD and LLM in taxation, Kristen is a sought-after speaker within her industry. Her partner and my partner, Brian Rogers, has over 20 years of experience in executive benefits with a specialization in corporate-owned life insurance and bank-owned life insurance. His primary responsibilities at NFP include building and maintaining relationships with nonprofit organizations, financial institutions, and corporations across the country. Brian works to design, implement, communicate, and manage split dollar plans, non-qualified deferred compensation plans, and supplemental executive retirement plans for key executives and directors. Kristen and Brian, thank you for being with us today. I'd also like to thank our friends from Baker Hostetler for helping us put together today's presentation and for sharing their knowledge with our audience. We're joined by 2 very talented attorneys who I've been lucky enough to work with at Baker Hostetler, Ray Malone and John McGowan. Ray has more than 35 years of experience in employee benefits and executive compensation area. He assists public and private companies, large tax-exempt organizations, and other types of employees with executive compensation arrangements and ERISA-related issues, including transactional support. John has nearly 40 years of ERISA and related employment tax, healthcare and security law experience, and represents benefit plans and plans covered individuals, plan sponsors, plan fiduciaries, and executives. John is particularly adept at handling the special regulatory challenges and disputes that plan sponsors, plan fiduciaries, and other stakeholders face when things go wrong, regardless of the root cause. John and Ray, thank you both very much for being here with us today. We're hoping that Ken Feinberg can join us right around 1:45. Ken unfortunately had to go to a funeral today, but he emailed me very early in the morning and is making a special effort to join us. And I'll say more things about Ken when he joins us. But for right now, we'd like to start our presentation. The first thing I'd like to do is ask Ray and John, can you tell us about this excise tax? How did it come in existence under 2017 tax law? Which nonprofit entities are subject to it? What type of remuneration payments trigger the excise tax?
Thanks, Alan. I think in terms of why it's here I think it was partially a pay for, a device to raise revenue to pay for some of the job uh, uh, cuts and Tax Cuts and Jobs Act tax cuts. And it was also, I think, motivated in part by tax policy. And I think it was intended to uh, kind of level the playing field between for profit employers who, on the one hand, are subject to an excise tax on co- uh, excess compensation paid in connection with a change in control. There's a similar concept here where there's an excise tax on compensation in excess of a certain amount uh, paid in the event of an involuntary termination of an employee. And then also to to kind of mimic the code section 162M limitation on compensation, uh, where for-profit entities lose a deduction where they pay compensation in excess of $1 million. The Congress felt that the value of that was about 21%, and so they levied an excise tax to kind of mimic the loss of the deduction on the for-profit side against the taxes, tax exempt organizations. Um, in terms of what entities are subject to it, um, it's generally 501c3 organizations, which can include, for example, and we've worked with all of these actually, hospitals and hospital systems, large private foundations, universities, generally all private universities, and a good host of state-sponsored universities as well. Lobbying organizations, trade associations, large trade associations, sports leagues. So the breadth of coverage of this is really pretty broad. John, do you want to talk a little bit about remuneration?
Sure. The remuneration subject to this excise tax, as Alan indicated and as Ray pointed out, goes to remuneration paid during a year to a covered employee by one of these tax exempt organizations that's subject to this rule. The remuneration in question is wage income. So wage income would take into effect and sweep in all direct compensation paid for services rendered, the taxable value of fringe benefits that were provided. Anything along those lines would qualify as remuneration subject to this rule.
Bonuses, incentive
Bonuses,
payments.
exactly. Anything that if you think about it, you would pay Social Security tax or Medicare tax on. That kind of compensation.
We'll talk about the real killer, 457F.
Yep, and 457F, which is a form of deferred compensation, and still constitutes wage income when taxable to the individual, will be taxed when received, and it would constitute wage income. So any compensation that a tax exempt organization pays to one of these executives, particularly if it's bunched together, if it's paid all at one time, even if it spans services provided over a number of years, if it's bunched and paid in a single payment, it still constitutes wage income, and therefore still comes within the scope of this excise tax. Obviously, there's other types of benefits that individuals receive. For example, when they receive distributions from a pension or profit sharing plan, a tax qualified pension or profit sharing plan that the organization sets up, those benefits that are paid do not constitute wages because they're specifically exempt under the Internal Revenue Code. Contributions made to a qualified plan and payments made by the qualified plan or distributions from it are not wage income. So there are a number of elements of compensation that don't get picked up, but direct compensation, bonuses, incentive payments, salary, anything along those lines is subject to it.
John,
Yeah.
John and Ray, who pays this tax? Is it the individual or the organization?
The organization pays the tax, and it's applicable to what's called a covered employee. A covered employee is defined in the statute and regulations as the top 5 paid individuals in the organization. But here's another trap. It's not the control group. So if there's a hospital system that has multiple entities within its controlled group, it would apply at each of the entities. So you could have multiple top 5 people, multiple groups of top 5 people. So it's really a lot broader than just organization wide.
Right, and it's the top 5 who are being paid that taxable year by that tax exempt organization. So it isn't like you can round up the usual suspects and know who the top 5 are. If in fact you had in year 6, a person, as Ray pointed out, who gets a large payment under a 457F plan because their interests vest under that deferred compensation plan in that year, somebody could leapfrog out of number 6 or 7 position and be amongst the top 5, and all of a sudden that person would be among the top 5 paid by that tax exempt organization in that year for purposes of applying this excise tax. So it isn't like it defies some sort of simple test.
Can you talk about the parachute payments? Perhaps if people aren't making $1 million, but if somebody's making $300,000 and all of a sudden they get a payment on severance, how does that affect the excise tax?
Yeah, it's calculated in a way that's similar to, or maybe identical to, golden parachute payments that are payable in taxable organization situations when there's something paid in connection with a change in control. But here, what you do is you take the last 5 years of taxable compensation and you average it. And if what's getting, so you get an average number, say it's 300,000. And say somebody is going to get a big severance payment under an employment agreement because they were involuntarily terminated from a hospital or a university. If what that payment is that's contingent on this involuntary separation exceeds 3 times that 5-year average, then the excess is taxable to the payor, the organization. So you can have somebody making under $1 million if they're involuntarily separated, end up having the university having to pay this. And again, it was intended to sort of punish them for making what Congress considered excessive payments in a tax-exempt organization situation. But in the private sector, they punish you by taking away your deduction. Here, since deductions don't matter to tax-exempt organizations, what they've done is they said the loss of a deduction is roughly worth 21%. So we're going to tax you an additional 21%. So it was sort of intended to level the playing field between taxable and tax-exempt organizations.
Right, but one of the things that this tax legislation fails to take into account is the fact that probably most tax-exempt organizations are organized as not-for-profit entities or are subject to a number of different I won't even try to go there. Special state considerations that deal with their charitable purpose or their stated objectives and goals. So the idea is that many of these organizations, unlike private for-profit entities, will have rules governing how they're compensating their people and whether or not it serves the larger goal of the charitable purpose or the educational purpose that the organization has. So one of the more vexing aspects of this is that it increases the cost of compensating key executives, but puts an additional burden on the organization and on the directors or the trustees of the organization to justify paying that much money, including this excise tax, to these individuals, taking into account the purposes of the organization. And for-profit companies don't have those issues. They basically depend upon the marketplace to decide whether something is, makes business sense. So it's a wrinkle.
Yeah, John and Ray, thank you for laying out the problem so well. Going to the next slide. Kristen, can you talk about the success of an organization, any organization, whether it be nonprofit or for-profit, and perhaps how we're looking at helping nonprofits on this excise tax issue?
Sure, absolutely. What we're looking at here is what I often think of as the employment life cycle. In order for an organization to be successful, it needs to identify, hire, retain, and reward key employees. There's always a group of employees that are crucial to the ongoing success of an organization. And that's true whether that's a for-profit or a nonprofit entity. But as we'll talk about through the rest of this presentation, in addition to the new excise tax, there are other real challenges that nonprofit organizations face. Nonprofits need to hire the same qualified individual that a for-profit company would. I often use the example of a hospital system. A hospital system needs a new chief technology officer. Hospitals have a lot of requirements to maintain client privileges and confidentiality, but electronic medical records, they're going to need a technology officer that's able to handle all of those different aspects. They don't necessarily need to know anything about a hospital system or medicine. And so that nonprofit is often competing with a for-profit organization to attract and then retain that key individual, that new chief technology officer. And when they face challenges and hurdles with rewarding that individual, whether it's limitations in 457F or the excise tax, it just becomes harder for the organization to really retain and attract those individuals. So, Alan, as you said earlier, we will talk about a lot of the strategies that those organizations use to keep the employees throughout the entire employment life cycle.
Brian, you've had a lot of experience working with nonprofit employers. Can you talk about some of the unique challenges they face as a nonprofit tries to attract, retain, and reward key employees? Also talk, Brian, a little bit about what happens. You have somebody who's worked for an organization for, let's say, 20 years, highly compensated, has a 457F. What happens with all that money that's grown inside the 457F from the executive standpoint as well as the organizations? You're on mute, Brian.
Sure, thanks, Alan. So when we talk to our nonprofit employers, we think of the executive benefit planning from obviously a more global strategic point of view when we first start. And these three items we think are really important for understanding the organization, what their concerns might be. In particular, we look at the program optics and how it will affect them in particular, their budget considerations, as well as what are we trying to ultimately accomplish? Is it employee retention? Are we trying to attract folks? Or are we trying to sort of set them up for retirement? Nonprofits have a different set of concerns than a for-profit organization, in particular when it comes to optics. Obviously, they're under a little bit more of a microscope from a public scrutiny standpoint. A non-federal nonprofit will file a 990. The compensation information is available for all to see. Very infrequently do you read about, Jeff Bezos getting a $14 million bonus, but if the hospital CEO down the street got a $2 million bonus, oftentimes it hits the papers. So from an optics perspective, the plan that's instituted should be thought about from how it will look on the outside, as well as the budget considerations. As with any benefit plan, it's what can we afford and how are we going to fund it? Meaning, are we going to use our money or are we going to allow the employee to contribute? And when it comes to nonprofits, the employee dollars are hard. It's hard to set aside dollars from the employee's perspective, especially tax deferred. And it's an unfortunate part of the tax code is that they just don't allow for a lot of deferral of employee dollars for any specific or lengthy amount of time. And I'll touch on the 457 in 1 minute, probably on the next page, Alan, because that is right now the most popular benefit strategy. And I think it's one that perhaps will drive excise tax issues or a restructure of the plan, making it a little less attractive for any of these items, retention, attraction, and ultimately saving for retirement, which again is sort of typical. It's what we talk about when we talk executive benefits is how are we going to attract, retain, and then help folks retire. And if we go to that next page, we'll talk here about the 457, because what's happening, and as John and Ray and Alan have all, and Kristen have alluded to, is the excise tax affects this. But right now, the most common benefit structure for driving out a larger benefit to your key folks, either, for retention or to get them in the door, is the 457F. There's also 457B, which again can be employer and employee money, but it's limited to basically the qualified plan amount, the 19.5 this year. So then you flip to the 457F, which has an unlimited amount of deferrals. However, it's typically only employer, it's almost always only employer dollars, because the moment somebody vests, it becomes taxable. So what we've seen, especially in this new world we live in under the excise tax, is that people are altering vesting schedules to be much shorter, so that in the event you have let's say a 10-year buildup that could generate, let's say, $1 million benefit payment, now all of a sudden that $1 million was subject to an excise tax they didn't have when they started. So most employers we're finding are making the 457F vesting schedule much shorter. And so when it's 2 or 3 years, all of a sudden, key executives have money coming in them essentially every year once the vesting schedule sort of gets 2 or 3 years down the road. And the question we come with is that what they want, first of all, from an employee perspective? And is that what you want from an employer perspective? Is this retaining anyone? So with the 457F and the excise tax in particular, it's becoming more of a conversation piece as to how we can handle dealing with it, and whether or not it's really an attractive and useful benefit strategy. And then the other one we commonly see is an after-tax solution. So I call this sort of a hybrid, if you will. The dollars go in after tax, but then they're usually set aside in some sort of permanent life insurance policy that builds up cash value, sort of like a bank account. And that bank account is can be tax-free in retirement, or distributions can be tax-free. It also provides additional death benefit for the individual. And so that can be useful. The only question there is how well does that really do the job of retaining? There's not a lot of hooks that an employer can put in there. You can put a restrictive covenant on there, but when they leave, if they want to pay the premium, you just stop paying premium. So if they leave and they pay premium, they just take it with them. So it's not really very sticky. So that sort of gets us to, okay, we've got this new excise tax issue. We're limited in what we can do. Is there anything else out there?
So, John and Ray, you have any comments on this, or I can ask Kristen to talk about some possible solutions, but just wanted to keep it going here. John and Ray, if you have any thoughts, let us know.
No, I think we're good for now. Brian did a nice job of pointing out that 457Fs, which, have been the go-to compensation component for executives, has severe practical limitations.
Don't keep saying it.
All right, thank you. So, Kristen, we got a problem. What's our solution?
So, as Brian was pointing out, the old problem, the 457F plan, really does not necessarily, it's a costly program for the employer. It can cause optics problems. They have to report on the 990 annually, the compensation that's paid. And when an employee vests, there's a big reporting of compensation. And there's no way to add a footnote that says, P.S., this is compensation that vested over 10 years because they're a long-term employee. It's just a big amount that vests. And the employee, as you can see in the old problem, they lose a substantial amount of every dollar to income taxes. And particularly because you get a large amount at one time under 457F, that usually pushes them up into the highest bracket if they're not there already. And on top of that, now you have the added expense of the excise tax. So as we've seen in many situations, when we go to talk to a nonprofit organization, they're very aware of the 457F problem. And then those who are subject to excise tax are aware of that also. And so as we're going to move into, there's a really great solution that we've been talking to organizations about that address all of the problems inherent in 457F, the excise tax, and the optics presented by the 990.
So what's the solution, Kristen? Brian?
Well, what we're talking to people about is loan regime split dollar, and it's a structure that has the organization lending the employee the money that they need to pay premiums. Those premium dollars are put into life insurance contracts, sometimes one, sometimes two contracts, depending on the nature of the design. And the employer then takes a security interest in the life insurance because it's a valid loan. There's interest that's charged and then ultimately a repayment obligation. But because it's not it's not money that's paid out, it's lent out, there's no current income taxes, which means it's not remuneration for the purposes of your excise tax calculation. And that repayment obligation and the collateral assignment that the employer holds in the policy serve as retention tools, which, as Brian was pointing out, if you're doing annual vesting with the 457F, then you're not getting that retention tool. So that's really the basic structure of it. Brian, do you want to talk a little bit more about some of the ways in which the employer and the employee sort of respond to loan regime split dollar?
Sure, happy to. I think right now, again, this design certainly has advantages. I would say that some of the drawbacks are it's a little more complicated, as you might imagine, than a 457F. But overall, when you sort of show the economics of the transaction, meaning the employer is now loaning out dollars that they're going to be returned with interest. The employee is not paying tax on those dollars and has a vehicle to withdraw from later on in life should they choose to on a tax advantage basis, as well as has death benefit in the short term and long term that can be used for their beneficiaries or their estate, and also will be used to repay the organization. We've found that on its face, this is a too good to be true situation. But again, now you have an arrangement that's going to be very long term, but can be very advantageous for both groups. So I think from a standpoint of how well are these received, it's very well received. And we look at it as sort of a package when you're talking to executives, as this may be an offering in whatever else you're doing.
Brian, let me ask you a question. How long split dollar been around? Is this something that all of a sudden came around in 2017, or what's the deal here?
No, that's a great question. Loan regime split dollar has, I think, been around since the 60s. It's been primarily used as an estate planning tool for ultra wealthy schools, where they typically would borrow the money from a bank or some sort of financial institution to fund these types of arrangements. And so what happened, obviously, in 2017 was the excise tax put a spotlight on something that really nobody had anticipated, and creative folks came up with a way to help organizations deal with that. Quite frankly, the credit union nonprofit space has been doing this for many, many years as a way to provide benefits to their executive population. Again, it's been around for a long time, so it does work. It works in the financial setting, they're under a lot more scrutiny than a lot of nonprofit organizations. So it's just one of those things that sort of has become very popular. And I think two reasons: one, the excise tax, and two, the low interest rate environment.
Hi.
I'd like to add one other thing to that. The thing that I think that has increased the use of this is the IRS's recent acceptance of loan regime split dollar as a deferral tool in recent pronouncements that they've made over the last several years. And in particular, it not being loan regime split dollar not being subject to 409A or 457F, those two code sections that are difficult to deal with in the tax exempt organization space for deferred comp. So I think partially the IRS acceptance of it has been sort of instrumental in pushing things along.
Right, and it comes with this caveat, and it gets back to what Kristen pointed out, which is these are loans. There are loans involved here. They have to be bona fide loans. There has to be a clear obligation to repay. It has to be well supported. But therein lies also the advantage to the tax exempt organization, which is a use of their funds, which they're going to get back. And so, I mean, it presents better to anybody, any stakeholder looking on, which is, we weren't using the money anyway, and we're using it now for a compensatory purpose, but that money's coming back. They're getting the benefit of it for now. But in the meantime, it's just parked funds.
And the other thing that we often see is the organization maybe was setting aside the money that was earmarked as part of a 457F payment, which once that individual vests and the payment is paid out, that money is gone and does not come back to the organization. So to the earlier point, the organization is maybe repurposing some other dollars, but that because it's a valid loan, it has to be repaid. So while it's a long time to wait, sometimes they would have not gotten a single penny back under a different structure. So that's one of the things that makes it appealing for the employer. And we also haven't talked about the employee side. And maybe the next slide is good because it will really sort of show how all of the different pieces come together. But for the employee, as I mentioned earlier, the 457F plan is entirely taxable and up to sort of 47 to 55 cents on the dollar are lost to income taxes. Whereas this plan, the loan isn't taxable, the loan interest is taxable, but because of the way life insurance works, the cash value can be accessed income tax free as well. So not only is it a benefit to the employer because ultimately there's full repayment of every dollar paid out, but for the employee, there's a lot of income tax mitigation that's available through the loan regime strategy. And this slide here just really shows how the structure works. The loans from the organization to the individual who pays the premium on the life insurance. And the life insurance has two components. One is a death benefit, one is the cash value. That's where I was saying the cash value can be accessed income tax free at vesting or retirement to be used at the executive's discretion for supplemental retirement or whatever sort of expenses come along. That death benefit is first paid back to the organization as loan repayment. If the loan is not repaid, it is taxable as cancellation indebtedness income to the executive. So it's in everybody's interest to make sure that the organization gets every dollar back through full loan repayment. Any excess death benefit then goes to the estate of the individual. So whether that individual dies shortly after retirement or lives a long and fruitful life, there's supplemental retirement income and often a little bit left over for the family as well.
And then having an obligation to repay an increasingly large debt can act as a powerful retention device.
Absolutely.
Now Alan's on mute.
We've lost Alan.
I'm sorry. You have to use life insurance here. Is that correct? And what's the benefit?
So life insurance, we say that you do need to use life insurance in this structure. First of all, because of the tax advantages inherent in life insurance, but more importantly, because one of the things that gives us comfort in doing loan regime split dollar is that we have very detailed regulations from the IRS that tell us what interest rate we need to charge, how we collateralize the loan, how we pay for the transaction. And so having all of that, but the regulations also talk about life insurance and how some of the repayment comes from life insurance by the policy. So if there isn't life insurance inherent built into the plan, then the question is, can you even rely on those regulations and make sure that you fit in with what the service says? Brian, Can you talk about
Yeah,
sort
I
of
think
how
it's,
loan regime split dollar is sort of
Okay.
addressing the excise tax and the optics sort of 990 struggles that some nonprofit organizations have?
yeah.
Yeah, we-
So I talked a little bit earlier about that. So the loan, because these are loans, they're not compensation. And so for those familiar with the 990, the compensation today goes on Schedule J. And ironically, with a 457F type of a program, it shows up twice, believe it or not. It shows up when you make it, with the contribution. It also shows up as compensation when you pay it out. So it's sort of a double whammy. So here, what effectively is happening when you turn the compensation into a loan is you're lowering the compensation number for that individual on J, and you're disclosing the loan on Schedule L. So from an optics perspective, I mean, today, and this could change, is that you do have to disclose the loan to an interested party, but it's changing where it's located and it's not identified as compensation. So from that perspective, it could change the optics. And I think the other piece that changes optics, depending on the organization, is that we've taken what was, and again, we've talked about this a lot, we've taken what was an expense and we've turned it into a receivable effectively. And so, you know, again, any sort of reasonable financial person would say, okay, if I had $1 million expense and I turned it into $1 million plus interest return, that's a good thing.
Brian, why don't you go through a couple of the slides that actually show the dollars on both sides here?
Yep. Okay, we'll do. Sort of running out of time. So here's sort of a model that we put together. The model's similar. The assumptions are the same. It's an executive age 52. We assume retirement at 65, death at 95. They're in a 46% tax bracket. We have not even covered the tax. Obviously, in life insurance has tax advantages, but we have not even covered the fact that we think tax rates could go up. We compare the loan idea to cash out in a couple of instances. We'll just go through one again for the sake of time here. But here are the assumptions. It's basically 10 annual payments or 10 annual loans of $400,000, and then the underwriting situation. And so on the next page, again, I know everybody loves to see really small spreadsheets in a Zoom meeting, but the idea here is on the left, I'll simplify this page and don't get too carried away. The left is cash, $400,000 paid out. The person pays tax of 46%. That's $184,000 of tax. They net $215 to invest, and they invest it at $325. Again, $325 is the net number after they pay whatever additional tax on the earnings would be. So follow that down to column 5 to age 66. I believe we basically annuitize their account value, right? So they get $157,000 a year, $158,000 a year for the rest of their life. It's about $4.7 million. So now, as part of that transaction, the employer each year was, assuming the person is earning over $1 million, is paying 21% excise tax plus their 145 of Medicare. So we have an $89,000 a year payment from the employer that they did not have before to the government. And so over time, plus the $400,000 payment to the individual. So over time, their dollars, when that person leaves, is $4.9 million. Instead, let's turn that into a loan on the far right. We're going to loan $400,000 and we didn't really hit on the details of the interest rate. The interest rate can be anything. It's got to be at least the applicable federal rate for the term of the loan. In this case, it's a long term, plus 9 years. So we're going to use the AFR of the long-term applicable federal rate, which at the point in time we looked at this was 1.98, which is about right for today, ironically. And that's the interest rate. You could charge 0, But if you charge 0, the person must pay tax on, in this case, 1.98 imputed income, just like sort of if anybody has a group plan where people are getting death benefit, they pay imputed income over 50,000. So that's the same concept here. But we charge interest. We assume the interest rate goes up in this scenario. And so that loan builds over 10 years to 4.5 million. Now again, that 4.5 million is coming back to the organization. Under the old regime, we just spent 4.9 million. So again, that's a big swing. You know, that's a $10 million swing. So now we're gonna compound the interest over the life of this individual. And so if you follow the far column 12 all the way down till they die, the organization gets $11 million, and then that repays the loan settled. Now let's focus on the middle columns, 9, 10, and 11. The individual on column 11, year 1, has $7.8 million of death benefit. So if something were to go tragically wrong, their beneficiaries would be covered with $8 million of life insurance. By the way, the 457 or the cash version, that number is, I'll call it $400,000 of that compensation. So that the economics of that plan advantage are obviously astronomically better in this situation. Play that out until they retire, and now we're going to draw out $200,000, and that's column 10 at age 66. We're just going to annuitize the cash value there. We're going to pull out $200,000 a year. We need to make sure that there's death benefit to repay the loan, and that's a part of this is the partner that you use for these programs is around this long, number one, and will support you and the individual in pulling out the right amount of money so that everything works. And that's a critical piece. But this person pulled out $200,000 a year, and then they have death benefit next to that should they die in any of those years, as well as repayment. So at the end of the day, the organization who would have spent, $4.9 million is going to get back $12 million. So they're 11 million. They're obviously the economics for them are much better. And if you just look at the individual, they were to get 4.7. Here they're going to get 6 plus a little death benefit, 6.8 million. And that's all sort of summarized at the bottom.
Brian, let me interrupt for once.
Before we go on, Ellen, before we go on to the next one, there was a question in the chat box.
Yeah, that's what I want to do.
Okay.
Jeanette asked a question. She said, we just got a split dollar, which is very long tails and very complicated. How long before the government understands this process is prohibited? I'm concerned about getting involved in all of these things again. Let me say this. I've been doing this for 45 years. They have changed split dollar and have to get out of it if they didn't change the plan from, let's say, an employee, an equity split dollar into a loan regime split dollar. So what we're doing is following the regulations to a T here on loan regime split dollar. So Ray, John, anybody want to comment on Jeanette's question?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I think we mentioned earlier was the fact that split dollar life insurance has been around a long, long time. Actually, I think it goes back to the mid 50s. So, I mean, as it has been an accepted principle. And then actually in the early 2000s is when the IRS came out and basically formalized these relationships and said that this loan regime exists. So it's been around for a good 20 years. I do not expect the IRS to just kind of have some Monday morning wake-up call where they decide that this is a bad thing. This is a long-standing, long-accepted arrangement.
Well, and I think it's not, the IRS couldn't do anything adverse in this kind of situation. It would take literally an act of Congress. And I will tell you as a practical matter, the life insurance company lobby in Congress for tax matters is probably one of the strongest lobbies that exists in this country. And I can't imagine life insurance companies letting this happen, no matter who controls Congress or the Joint Committee on Taxation or House Ways and Means Committee, Senate Finance Committee. I just don't think it's going to happen.
The other thing, Jeanette, is that we've sort of danced or touched on this a couple times. There are two different versions of split dollar. And I'm guessing that the version that you're familiar with that you got out of that was complicated is what we would call economic benefit split dollar. And that can have a lot more complications and it sort of is more management. The loan regime split dollar that we're talking about here is much more akin to, say, taking out a mortgage to buy a house. Just a series of loans with interest that's due and then ultimately a repayment of the loan principal. So yes, it still has a long tail, but when we talk to organizations and, specifically to the HR departments that are in charge of, of explaining this to employees and working with organizations that help support it, they find that explaining the loan regime to both the board of the organization and to the individual that's going to participate is an easier sort of process than it would be with the other type of split dollar. So, I think it's wise to be asking those questions, but it's a different beast in itself. It's got a different way of being explained and sort of managed. And to Ray and John's points, it's just a loan principal with loan interest, and we're just using loan to pay to buy life insurance. So it's a much more traditional way of buying any sort of asset. And so to their point, it would probably take an act of Congress to do something dramatic to how split dollar is treated.
Brian, why don't we go and show the example of a 457F and how that would actually play out compared to taking income every year?
Sure, it's actually worse. So the principles here are all the same, and I won't, carry everybody across other than to start in the first column too. Basically, this would be as if $400,000 annual contribution vested in 10 years. So the individual pays tax at that point in time of $2.5 million. They net $2.5 million roughly. And then we assume they invest that after tax for a couple of years before retirement, and their annuitized benefit stream at age 65. First payment in 66 is $157,000. But as you can see there, the organization in the next column over had to pay $1.1 million of excise tax. So they've paid out 6.1 in this scenario. So it's actually worse for the organization. And again, this is a visual representation of why long 457F especially on folks that make over $1 million is gone away. And that they're much, much shorter vesting schedules for both the individual to help with their tax situation and the organization to help with their tax situation. But ultimately, the benefits that are provided in both scenarios are very close. A little bit sort of worse off here in the vesting scenario. But ultimately, the answer is that the individual's better off by almost $2 million in this scenario. And the organization gets repaid their, $11 million. The one thing to note here is that we're dealing with a 52-year-old. If this is a 65-year-old, odds are it may not work. You need the right situation, and that's why we sort of say, from our perspective, is let's build a package, not a solution. Let's build something for everyone where we have 457B, 457F. Loan regime split dollar, maybe the after-tax arrangement for somebody who likes sort of the Roth idea. So it's really not a one-size-fits-all, and it's very specific. And to further drill down, the insurance policy that I want may not be the insurance policy that you want. So there's options in that sort of arena as well. So there's a very individualized solution.
I see that Ken has joined us. Ken, are you on?
I am on. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. So
Good.
we have a few minutes. And Ken, again, sorry about what you've gone through today, and thank you for being with us.
No, I wanted to make it clear. Can you get rid of the chart so I can see you guys, your face? There we are.
Okay.
I want to line
Okay.
me up. Can you see me okay, Alan?
Yep, we can. Thank you.
Okay.
So I'll just introduce Ken very quickly. basically, I've known Ken through his wife since 1986. Ken, throughout his career, has been key in resolving many of the nation's most challenging and widely known disputes, including the BP oil spill, the Virginia Tech shooting massacre, the Boston Marathon bombing, and the General Motors car recall, among others. But Ken is best known for serving as a special master of the September 11th Victim Compensation Fund, in which he reached out to all who qualified to file a claim, evaluated applications, determined appropriate compensation, and disseminated awards. Ken shared his extraordinary experience in his book, What is a Life Worth? And his follow-up book, Who Gets What? Ken's experience will also be depicted in the upcoming film, Worth. Ken, as my friend, I thank you very much for joining us, even if it's for 10 minutes. We appreciate anything you'd like to say, we'd like to hear. And if anybody has any questions, just shoot them on the chat line.
Well, I can tell you one thing. You mentioned my role in administering the September 11 Victim Compensation Fund. Almost 4,000 people died in that tragedy. And what I found to be astounding in evaluating the people died, particularly in the World Trade Center, that did not have any life insurance. They were young people. They didn't think they needed life insurance. They didn't think it applied to them. And we found in evaluating applications and distributing the money, we were astounded at the number of people, anywhere from 35 to 70, that when the surviving family members applied to the fund, they had no life insurance. And fortunately, the 9/11 fund, using taxpayer money, made up that shortfall. But you'll recall, Alan, that's when I ran back to you and doubled, I think, the amount of life insurance I had in light of the experience firsthand I learned on 9/11.
Thank you on that. But what was it? I mean, just tell us a little bit about what you did there. I mean, you literally met with every single family.
That's right. The 9/11 fund was created by Congress 13 days after 9/11. And the law simply said, anybody who wants to give up their right to go to court against the World Trade Center, the airlines, the Pentagon, the security guard companies, anybody who wants to waive those rights to go to court and come into a special taxpayer-funded compensation program can do so. You don't have to. It's voluntary. 97% of the people came into the fund. We paid out in taxpayer money a total of a little over $7 billion. And only 94 people decided to go to court. Everybody else came into the fund. Calculating the amount of money for each person was not difficult. That is not rocket science. Judges and juries do that every day in every court in the United States. The problem was the emotion. The emotion. Families coming to see me angry about the loss of a loved one, frustrated, uncertain about their future. It was emotionally debilitating. That is what I highlighted in my book, and that is what is highlighted in the upcoming movie.
Ken, how could people say nobody liked what you did and everybody liked what you did? They thought you were fair and all that. I mean, how did you do it?
Well, first of all, the American public, back in 2001, everybody was behind me. It wasn't a political effort. Democrats, Republicans, liberals, conservatives, red states, blue states, everybody rallied around the victims in this program. What made it so difficult was the anger and frustration of the families themselves. A lady comes to see me. Mr. Feinberg, I lost my husband. He was a fireman. He left me with our 2 children, 6 and 4. Now you're going to give me $2 million tax-free. I want it in 30 days. Well, Mr. Jones, I mean, this is taxpayer money. I've got to go to the US Treasury. They've got to cut the check. Why do you need it in 30 days? Why? I'll tell you why, Mr. Feinberg. I have terminal cancer. I have 10 weeks to live. My husband was going to survive me and take care of our 2 children. Now they're going to be orphans. And I've got to get this money while I still have my faculties. Now my husband's gone. I've got to set up a trust. I've got to find a guardian. I need this money and I need it fast. The clock is ticking. Well, we ran down to the Treasury. We accelerated the payment, got it to her. 8 weeks later, she died. So it was the emotional part of this. When you take on an assignment like this, you better brace yourself for what you're going to hear.
And, so tell us, the movie is coming out in when?
The movie's coming out on September 3rd to honor the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks. And it's all about my design and administration of the 9/11 fund. I'm played in the movie by Michael Keaton. My children say he's better off playing Batman than playing me, but you know, they're Amy Ryan plays my colleague Rita Viros.
Does he have your accent? Does he have your Boston accent?
Stanley Tucci's in it. It's pretty.
Does he have your Boston accent? I think you froze up, Ken.
Yep.
I think we lost Ken.
Nope, there he is.
Are you back?
Sort of.
Well, okay. I've known Ken literally since 1986. Okay, Ken, the only other question we want to ask you, we lost you. Does he have your Boston accent?
Well, he does a pretty good job when he says things like, I parked my car in Harvard Yard, but he does all right on those, a little bit weak on some of the others, but overall, he does a pretty good job, yes.
All right. I don't want to take too much more time. I want to ask you you told one funny story. You were in charge of the BP spill down in New Orleans. How did you decide these fishermen would come to you and say, I want X? And you would say to them, I need certain things. So just give us a couple of examples.
Oh, a fisherman would say, I couldn't fish and I lost $1 million or I lost $500,000 because I couldn't fish. I would say, for example, well, show me, give me some profit and loss statements or some tax return or something that can show me to corroborate your damage. And one fisherman said, I don't have a tax return. Well, he gave me something in crayon. I mean, we added it up. It looked fairly good. I said to him, we're going to send you a check for $100,000. And with it, we're sending you a 1099 from the IRS. He says, you're sending me a 1099? I waive it. I said, you can't waive a 1099. I've got to send it to you. He withdrew his claim. The minute he knew the IRS was going to be on him, probably never paid taxes in his life. So we had quite a few stories like that.
Well, it's 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. I mean, Ken, thank you very much. And thank you, Kristen.
I'm glad I
Brian.
could join you guys even for a short period of time.
Well, thank you very much.
Glad to be part of it. Anytime, Alan. Anytime.
Thank you. Ray and John, thank you. Brian and Kristen, thank you. And I hope If you have any questions, obviously, send them to Mike Stagnita. Have a good day, everybody.
All right, take care.
Aye.
Bye.